Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So, I'm going to talk about a concept called biohacking. And to better understand this phenomenon, I'd like to tell you a story. And this story is a story that most of you probably know here. It's somehow the story of biology itself. So, biology, look at these pictures. It was 60 years ago. It was the discovery of the structure of DNA. Because we knew the structure of DNA, thanks to Watson and Crick here, we knew how to modify it, finally. So we came from an era of discovery, of understanding, to an era of modifying and constructing, building, making. And in 60 years, biology made bounds and leaps, huge progress, much faster than we thought. Just to give you an example, this is a graph showing you the decrease of the cost of sequencing a genome, a human genome. Just to give you a reference, the first human genome cost about 3 billion euros, and the effort of hundreds of scientists during 15 years to be sequenced. Now, in 2014, to sequence a genome, it takes few hours, and it costs less than 1,000 euros. Basically, we came from that to this in less than 15 years. So we are assisting to a huge revolution because biology is now getting smaller, cheaper, so more available to the general public in general. So anybody that wants to get their hands on biology can somehow. And we have not only amateurs or professionals, not only the practices of those professions are changed, but it's also the practices of the normal citizen. And they can have access to huge amount of information on the web, thanks to social networks, for example. And they have access also to new kind of tools. Imagine what you have with your smartphone. Imagine what you will get in the future also. So this is the era of quantify itself also. So we are assisting to a huge biotechnology revolution. And somehow this makes me think of the 70s for computers. In the 70s, computers were very big machines. They were made for very specific use, for big companies, big corporations. Very few people knew how to use a computer. But at that time, in universities, there were people teach to students how to somehow build computers, the logic behind it. And the cost of components, electrical components, were getting so low that it would enable students in their garage to build their own computer. And they would build their own computer for their own use. And that's the whole difference. They would not build computers for other corporation or for the current model. They would build computers for themselves, asking themselves what they want to do with it, just for fun. And that's how actually started a new era of exploration, of new uses, of new services based on computers and how personal computers came to be and how we know today of the digital revolution. So, and if in the 20th centuries, hackers somehow were hacking computers, in the 21st centuries, we hack biology. And that movement of reappropriation of the technology, here of the biotechnology, is called do-it-yourself biology, or biohacking, or garage biology. And it's a global movement. You can find biohacker spaces in many different places in the world, like here, for example, in Ireland, in France, in US, even in Syria. This is a map of all the biohacker spaces known today to exist in the world. So it's mainly in developed countries like in the US or in Europe, but there is a very strong start also in Asia, in developing countries, in Africa, in South America. But why is there such a strong movement toward creating those community labs, which are completely open to anybody to come? This is a graph showing you the average age for a researcher to get its first grant, somehow to be an independent researcher. You could expect to have one in the 80s around the age of 30, 35. But look at today. It's probably you have to wait maybe 45, 50, 55. That's such a bad situation, especially knowing that Darwin and Einstein made their main discoveries before the age of 30. Yet Darwin was on the bigger before the age of 30 and wrote the whole thing that became thereafter the theory of evolution before the age of 30. So now I'm going to give you a very precise example of what is a biohacker space. That Lab Payas is a biohacker space I co-founded in 2009 in Paris. It's a very long story. I'm just going to take you to what is Lab Payas today. Basically, we started in a squat because we had no money and we wanted to build a free open lab to anybody. And so we started in that place in 2011. We built a lab using refurbished equipment. That's how the lab looked at that time. We organized workshops. We wanted people to understand how to use biology because most of the people that comes to Lab Payas are non-biologists. Because most of them, maybe engineers, students, designers, sociologists, lawyers, it could be anyone, but most of them had that motivation to do something with biology. They were frustrated because biology were belonging only to somehow ivory tower, the academic world. Now we were offering actually something they could touch. So we were organizing also practical workshops, like for example here, it's a workshop to do DNA analysis, what we call DNA barcoding, and that is actually very useful to analyze what is in your food or in your meats, or for example, to know if your lasagna have horse meat or beef meat. And at that time, it became obvious that we had to propose a citizen counterpower. We live in an era where biotech are getting so diverse. They are everywhere in our life. So if we want actually our society to live better with those technologies, we need them to better understand. We need citizens to understand, and not because if they are so far, from the reality of those technology, because we use too much of metaphors somehow, then it's obvious why they will be against them, because they don't belong to them. So we have to bring them back. Bring back those technology in the hands of citizens so that they can develop new kind of uses and democratize those technologies. So we do, for example, environmental monitoring. We actually invent new lab hardware. We debate. And about 6 months ago, we got a huge opportunity thanks to the mayor of Paris, the city hall of Paris. We moved out of the squat and came right in the center of Paris. Why did we do that? Because we believed, and we made them believe also, that if we take Lab Payas as it is, and we put it in the city center, then with more space, with more facilities, then it's a huge bomb of opportunities for the local ecosystem. Imagine those hundreds of thousands of students that can now access laboratories to invent new stuff, even though they don't do practical workshop yet in the university. Imagine yourself at the age of 15, you do programming, the computer is enough. But if you want to start doing something with biotechnology, it's almost impossible. Now, it's starting to get possible, thanks to that. So we came from this very original and lovely place to a much poshy, lovely and historical place in Paris. And that's how it looks like. It's a 750 square meter place. We still have caves from the 18th century, so we didn't actually lost the spirit of the first place, hopefully. It's going to combine everything we know that is good for the community here. It's a co-working space, open classes for formation, for teaching, for showing, and biotech lab and a fab lab. So we want to bring the fast prototyping technology to the biotech world and let anybody that wants to do something, to try something, to start without asking, basically. You don't want to cut the envy out of people. If you have a motivation, there is no monopoly for great ideas. So if you have a motivation, just start it. You don't know where it's going to lead you. So Lapayas, because it started the movement by its growth also in France and larger in Europe, we got a huge attention, and people were starting to ask us, how do you create such a place? We want to have the same thing. And of course, it shouldn't be like something special that Paris has. We should have biohacker spaces in every city somehow. And so we started actually to encourage people to create their own biohacker spaces. And after about 6 months, now we have succeeded actually in helping the creation of almost 10 biohacker spaces in the world. And some of them were created thanks actually to the Live China conference back in September in Shenzhen, in Shanghai. Now I'm going to show you just a few examples of projects that happened in those spaces. This is an open PCR. So most of you know what is a PCR. It's a machine that is used for analyzing DNA, cutting it, reading it. But it's an expensive machine, and it's somehow a black box. It's impossible to know how it's working. So, of course, you won't ask yourself how to change it, how to actually repair it if it's broken. But with the open PCR, now you can. The open PCR costs only 500 euros, and it's completely open. You can find anything on the web. This was made about 3 years ago by engineers in California. And this was really the start of DIY Bio at that time. This is another example. A project made for analyzing diagnostic for malaria in Africa, for example. It's somehow qPCR in a shoebox. And the prototype is a machine for $50. Now they got some funding, and they are going to start with this machine, which looks much better in Africa. But just to give you more example of projects that got to the point where projects that started in a lab, in a garage, now actually getting to the point where they can be distributed professionally through crowdfunding campaign. I'm going to show you 3 examples. This is a PCR machine that is just actually being launched, crowdfunding being launched right now on Kickstarter. For $350, you can get your own PCR machine. This is open qPCR. For $1,300, you can get your own qPCR machine. It's all open source again. And this is an OpenTrons machine for pipetting. It's a pipetting robot. And you know how much costs a pipetting robot? It's dozens of thousands of euros. Here, it only costs $2,000. And because the software behind is completely open, so it means that we can standardize the protocols between all the labs that will have such machine or derivatives. So that's very important for reproducibility. Now, let's have other examples. Those 2 guys, they are 2 engineers from Sony. And they have no knowledge of biology. And they came to Lapayas thinking, we want to work on biodegradable electronics, but we don't know how. Can we work together? I said, yeah, of course. And so that's the power of community labs, that you come with an idea, and then you start actually gathering people that want to do the same thing with you. And then things go faster, much faster than what you could do in a normal academic lab. And in about 6 months, we found out how to use a biomolecule, which is melanin that you have in your skin, for example, to get you tan, to be used as a semiconductor. And we had very conclusive conclusions, a very conclusive experiments about the use of melanin. But one thing is, when you use semiconductors, you have to use them and to experiment on them in a neutral atmosphere without oxygen, so you have to use glove box. Glove boxes are somehow expensive, and we couldn't get our hands on a glove box. So we made one out of IKEA box. And it works perfectly fine. Now, another category of product and experimentation, biomaterials. Biomaterials are a huge continent to be explored right now. And they have almost infinite-less possibilities. This is cellulose made by bacteria. So in that bowl, it was only liquid. Sugar, some tea, some bacteria inside. You wait about a week, and you get that thick foam of cellulose. That is something you can use for many things, cellulose. You know, you can make paper, but designers start to play with that kind of material to, for example, make clothes or fabrics. It's somehow like a philosopher's stone. You can make your own materials. That's very powerful. And that's just one example. And anybody can do that at home. It's very easy. Now I'm going to give you another example of biomaterial. It's a project that started in La Payas and from a crazy idea. This crazy idea is, can I have a pen that produces its own ink? Meaning that instead of having a cartridge, I have a bioreactor inside the pen. And inside the bioreactor, I have bacteria that produce pigments that I can use for writing. And then in exchange, I have to feed the bacteria. So it's like feeding your own pen. Well, we actually worked on it very hard, and after some time, we found out how to make this real. And we found out natural bacteria that grow in the soil that produce very nice pigments, and that with this pigment, we can create ink. And we worked with designers and biologists on this project. It's actually ink that even can change color. It can take blue, red, yellow, green colors very easily. It's amazing pigments. It was out there waiting for us in nature, and we actually built that right within a hacker space, a biohacker space, knowing that that bacteria was used for almost 30 years by researchers, but they had no idea how to use that pigment. And this is just examples of what you can do with it. You can also do paintings. But the thing is that this was so easy to create your own ink that we decided to create a kit for that anybody here, for example, or in the world that are interested in creating their own ink could make their own ink, grow their own ink. And this is interesting because maybe you don't know, but ink is one of the most polluting materials on the planet. It's made of heavy metals and very nasty solvents. And this one is completely biodegradable. It's biosourced and biodegradable, and you can make it yourself. And I'm going to end my presentation on this message. See, imagine yourself on a spaceship. You are in a closed environment. You have a limited amount of energy and matter. And if you want to go very far, you better actually manage your waste very well. Now, figure yourself you're on the planet Earth. Planet Earth is also a spaceship that goes through space. It's a closed environment with a limited amount of energy and matter. So if we don't use correctly our waste, or manage our waste, then we're probably going to end in a dead end. So how do we do here? We have to find new ways to create materials. We have to find new alternatives for biomaterials. We have to find new ways how to biodegrade materials in order to have complete cycles. Life is the best at doing this on the planet. That's why life is still here right now. But to do that, we need bioreactors. And bioreactors are a very expensive machine again. So there are biohackers working on cheap open source bioreactors. Bioreactors normally cost around 15 to 20,000 euros. Now, this one, for example, is a prototype being done in La Payas that costs less than 500 euros. And, I've talked about revolution. And we've lived many revolutions right now. We lived the digital revolution. We have unlimited access to information thanks to that. Now we have the revolution of makers. We can make things. We can fabricate. That's great. But how do you actually get your own materials? And for that, there is a third link to be added, and that's the bio. And I believe the third revolution will be the reappropriation and the democratization of biotech, as we had for digital information and the maker revolution. And so, being a biohacker, for me, is being a pioneer. If you're here to explore new possibilities, how to be interacting with your own environment and with yourself. And the nice thing about that is anybody can be a biohacker. Even you. And the first thing to do to become a biohacker is to reclaim what is already yours. And that's life. So I'll finish on this. Thank you very much.